This collection of lakehouse haunting tales delves into the unsettling experiences of individuals who sought solace and relaxation in remote cabins, only to encounter eerie mysteries and possibly malevolent presences. Each story reveals how it seemed like peaceful retreats turned into chilling encounters with the unknown. I work as a bartender in Sacramento and rarely get many days off. So, when my friend Bryce messaged me about a long weekend at a lake house near Shasta, I jumped at the chance even before he sent the Airbnb link. The plan was for 6 of us. Me, Bryce, his girlfriend Danny, her best friend Na, and a couple I hadn't met, Jake and Marissa. 4 nights, good weather, and no real agenda except to unwind. Exactly what I needed after pulling double shifts and craving fresh air. We arrived Thursday afternoon. The cabin was nestled in a quiet cove on the lake's northeast end. Not completely secluded, but far enough that no other houses were visible from the dock. The water was glassy smooth, the air rich with pine and charcoal scents. The cabin had that classic old lake house charm. Creaky floors, hand-me-down furniture, a yellowed fridge humming in the kitchen, and a back deck with a view that made you take a deep breath and just pause. It felt perfect. The first 2 days were just as expected. Beer, burgers, awful music, and swimming until our skin wrinkled. We played cards that turned rowdy after midnight, grilled way too much food, and passed around a Bluetooth speaker that always ended up playing the same 3 songs by night's end. Our nights blurred into wine, half-drunk ghost stories that no one really believed, and laughter that echoed across the lake. We even teased Bryce we locked his bedroom door the first night. "What? You think Bigfoot's gonna sneak in while you're spooning?" I joked. He laughed it off, but started keeping a flashlight by his bed after that. On the 3rd morning, I was down at the dock alone. Everyone else was still asleep or groggy from the night before. I wanted to dunk my face in the water and maybe sit on the edge with a coffee. That's when I noticed a kayak. Tied to the far side of the dock was a faded yellow kayak, the kind you rent at state parks. We hadn't brought one, and the rental listing didn't mention one either. I guess maybe a neighbor had tied it there by mistake where it had drifted overnight. But the rope was wet, like someone had just climbed out and tied it up. Fresh. Curious, I pulled in closer. The kayak was scratched, but nothing unusual for lake gear. At the back was one of those hollow storage compartments, which I opened expecting to find a life vest or maybe a spider. Instead, there was a Polaroid, old and weathered, its edges curled from moisture. Squinting, I saw it was a photo of us, taken from the tree lane across the water. The 6 of us sitting on the dock the day before. The red Solo cups, the inflatable swan, Bryce mid-cannonball. It had been taken without us knowing, from a distance. I didn't show anyone right away. Maybe I thought it was a prank. Maybe I didn't want to be the guy, freaking out over nothing. I slipped the photo into my hoodie pocket and casually mentioned the kayak at breakfast. Jake thought it was ours and shrugged it off. Danny hadn't noticed it earlier, and Bryce was busy making pancakes. That was that. But all day, I kept watching the dock, the tree line, listening for branches snapping. I had this weird feeling we were being watched. Not loudly or obviously, just a subtle itch like we weren't alone. That night, we built a fire. Bryce played his favorite indie folk tunes on the Bluetooth speaker. I sipped a beer, faced away from the woods. Danny went inside to grab marshmallows, and I followed briefly, glancing out the back window. I thought I saw movement near the tree line, a flicker of someone stepping behind a tree. I said nothing. Around midnight, I slipped out to check the dock one more time. The kayak was gone. Not drifted away, just gone. The rope, which was still looped the last time I checked, floated in the water, slack and undone. Nothing looked disturbed, but the kayak wasn't there. I stared across the lake, hoping to spot something out of place. Only the moon's reflection rippled on the water. Back inside, I thought about waking someone, but decided against it. Maybe a neighbor took it back. Maybe it was part of the rental, and someone came to retrieve it. The next morning, I brought up the kayak again. Everyone brushed it off. Marissa suggested it was a neighbor's kayak. Bryce shrugged. No one was really interested, which bugged me more than it should have. On our last day, we cleaned up. Trash out, coolers packed, beds stripped. I did a final sweep, a habit from closing bars. As I slid the glass door shut in the back, something caught my eye. Taped to the inside was another Polaroid. Us again, same angle as before, maybe a bit closer. We were gathered around the fire pit. Bryce in his hoodie, now laughing at Jake, and me holding my beer, looking over my shoulder toward the trees. I stared at it a long time, didn't call anyone over. I peeled it off the glass, slid it into my pocket next to the first photo, and walked out without a word. I still have both Polaroids. Haven't told anyone. Just a kayak, just a couple of photos. But someone was out there watching us, close enough to see our faces, close enough to tie something to our dock without a sound. And whoever they were, they came back. I work as a trauma nurse in Knoxville and rarely get time off. After a grueling month filled with back-to-back shifts in intense cases, my younger sister Allison urged me to take a break. She found a rental cabin on Norris Lake that seemed like the perfect quiet retreat. Lake access, Wi-Fi, and promising reviews. We arrived on a Friday, just before sunset. The cabin was nestled off a gravel road, surrounded by a dense pine forest. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and moss. The place had a cozy mid-century vibe, with big windows, a wraparound porch, at least 6 mounted deer heads glaring down from the walls. Despite its rustic charm, it felt comfortable and lived in. We settled into the 2 guest rooms, but down the hallway there was a locked door labeled Owner Storage. Please do not attempt to open. Allison joked it felt like a classic horror movie setup, but we laughed it off and spent the evening drinking wine and eating frozen pizzas on the porch. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke suddenly to an unsettling stillness in the cabin. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Then I heard it, a faint, uneven, sloshing sound, like liquid shifting inside a container. Assuming it was plumbing, I checked the kitchen sink, bathroom, and even a fridge's ice maker. Nothing. As I walked past the locked door in the hall, the sound came again. Slosh, pause, slosh. It resembled someone dragging a bucket through water. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, the noise slowly fading. I told myself it was the lake or the wind echoing through the house. The next morning, Allison surprised me with the same question. Did you hear water moving last night? She thought it might have been me in the bath, but the sound stopped abruptly. We shrugged it off and spent the day enjoying the sun on the lake. But on the following morning, a chilling discovery changed everything. While brushing my teeth, I noticed a dark, slick patch creeping under the locked door's frame. It was cold and wet, definitely water. Allison and I quickly tried to contain it with towels. There was no storm the night before, and as far as we knew, the locked room had no plumbing. I called the rental contact, Corey, who sounded groggy and told me that room was sealed with nothing inside. He told us not to open the door and that he'd get back to us. Hours passed with no call. The water had spread further across the hallway. With no other options, Allison convinced me we needed to open the door. Armed with a long metal skewer from the kitchen, we struggled with the lock until we finally unlocked it. A sudden, damp, earthy smell hit us as the door swung open. The room was small, barely a walk-in closet, and cold beyond reason. Water covered the floor up to our ankles, rippling gently as if something had just moved through it. But there were no faucets, no leaks, and the walls and ceiling were dry. The only items inside were some plastic storage bins, a few folding chairs, and a rolled-up rug. Then, our eyes were drawn to the far window. It was covered with a jar, and water dripped from its frame, like someone soaking what had just crawled through. Near that window hung a soaking wet wetsuit. Not a modern one, but vintage, like something a commercial fisherman might have worn decades ago. It was algae-covered and smelled of brine and decay. Neither of us dared to touch it. The door had been locked from the inside, with no footprints or puddles leading out. But somebody had been there. Somebody had left that suit behind. We didn't say much after that, choosing instead to pack up quickly and leave. We didn't wait for Corey's call. locked the door behind us, and drove straight back to the city. I couldn't shake the image of that wet suit, the feeling that we had unknowingly opened a door to something that wasn't meant for us. Whatever entity or presence had come through that window had chosen our cabin, our weekend, and left its trace behind. It wasn't just an old storage room. It was a mystery trapped behind a locked door, one that I still think about every time I try to sleep. My name's David, and I'm a retired Army medic. Not exactly the type to get spooked easily. After 2 decades in service, my wife and I decided to settle into a quiet, peaceful life away from the chaos. We found an old lake house on the Vermont side of Lake Champlain, a modest wooden place with creaky floors and a porch that overlooked the water. No flashy boats or noisy neighbors, just solitude and nature. We even nicknamed it Stillwater. Life felt perfect at first. Sleeping in, fishing off the dock, my wife painting in the late afternoons, and me tying my own fishing flies. Then, one chilly October day in 2021, that calm began to unravel. I woke early, around 4:30 a.m., feeling colder than usual. The fog lay thick over the lake, blurring the trees just beyond the shore. While standing by the kitchen window, I heard a scream, clear and desperate, coming from across the water. It echoed eerily through the fog. I called for my wife to stay inside, grabbed my coat, and headed to the dock, scanning the misty lake. The water was still and silent. I called 911, who dispatched a patrol boat, but they found nothing. No stranded boats, no swimmers, nothing. Just the fog carrying sounds from who knows where. We tried to shrug it off as a prank or perhaps a loud animal, but the unease lingered. That evening, as the sun set, the fog rolled in thick, muting the world around us, even silencing the loons. Later, as I was locking on my gear by the shed, I heard that crunch, footsteps on gravel, methodical and unhurried, then a sudden bang against the dock's ladder. I shone my flashlight into the water expecting driftwood or fish, but saw nothing. Then, illuminated by the beam, clear wet footprints appeared on the dock, bare feet stepping out from the lake, walking about 10 feet, then vanishing. No splash followed. No figure appeared. We secured every door, sleeping with lights on and a flashlight nearby, but the feeling stayed with us. The next day, no footprints remained. We contemplated reporting this to the police, but what could we say? Someone appeared and disappeared on our dock, leaving no signs aside from wet footprints and that chilling scream. Then, a few days later, the fog came back with the same scream. This time, I sat in the dark with a flashlight, waiting as the echoes faded into dawn. Over the next week, the fog visits continued sporadically, and we fortified every entrance, installed motion lights, and kept the blinds drawn tight. A neighbor at the bait shop, a local who'd lived there for 40 years, told me fog season had its own rules here. The lake, older than most remembered, held secrets. He warned me never to answer a voice coming from the water. Not long after, our niece and her boyfriend came for the weekend. We kept quiet about the strange sounds. That night, the fog rolled in early. While dining outside, we heard a faint splash, but dismissed it as a fish. Later, at 2 a.m., I heard slow, wet footsteps on the deck. I stood silently, watching, refusing to peek through the curtain. The steps faded away. The next morning, the motion light was off. No footprints were found, but the dock's ladder was dripping wet, as if someone had climbed up and waited silently. The last straw was finding Mason's missing glove tucked between 2 logs in the newest pile of firewood on the porch. Damp and smelling of pine, we packed up without a word, didn't sweep the floors, locked the cabin, and left without looking back. The property manager said he'd call the sheriff, but neither of us wanted to prolong the mystery. That's our story, the woodsman who has never seen but always felt. Since then, we haven't returned to those mountains. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just a neighbor or an overzealous caretaker. It was something else, something that chose to linger. My name's David, a retired Army medic who doesn't spook easily, After 2 decades in service, my wife and I decided to settle down somewhere quiet, away from chaos and crowds. We found a modest, old wooden house on the Vermont side of Lake Champlain. No flashy boats or jet skis, just creaky floors, a porch facing the lake, and forest behind us. We even named it Stillwater. Retirement was all about quiet mornings, fishing off the dock, and painting for my wife while I tied my own fishing flies. Everything was peaceful until late October 2021. One frigid morning, I woke unusually early, around 4:30 a.m. The fog was so thick, I could barely see the shoreline trees. As I stood at the kitchen window drinking water, a scream pierced the silence across the lake, desperate and pained, echoing through the dense fog with nowhere to go. Heart pounding, I called my wife to stay inside and grab my coat. Outside, the water was calm, the fog swallowing everything into white nothingness. I called 911, and patrol boat was dispatched to check her side. I stood on the dock for nearly an hour in the cold, watching, hoping for some sign of what had caused that scream. Nothing. The patrol saw no stranded boats, no swimmers, no distress, just an eerie stillness. They told me sound travels strangely over fog-covered water and that it might have come from miles away. That day stayed quiet, but as dusk fell, the fog rolled back in with a vengeance, creeping all the way to our porch, soaking screens and muting every sound. Even the loons fell silent. Later that night, locking up my gear by the shed, I heard splashes near the dock. A sudden bang against the ladder startled me as I shone my flashlight into the water, but nothing was visible. Then I noticed footprints, wet, bare, human, leading from the ladder onto the dock for about 10 feet, then vanishing into the fog. No splashing, no other signs. My skin crawled as I backed away and went inside silently. We barred every door and window and spent a restless night in a living room. The next day, the footprints were gone, like they were never there, though we considered notifying the police again. What could we say? A person stepping out of the fog, then disappearing without a trace. The mystery deepened when our trail cam caught nothing unusual, just raccoons and a blurry shape that might have been a bird. 3 days later, the same scream echoed across the lake at the same early hour. This time, I stayed inside, sitting in the dark with a flashlight in my lap. The screams came once, then faded until dawn. The fog returned frequently over the following week, never every night, but enough to keep me on edge. We installed extra locks and motion lights, closed the blinds early, and I started sleeping with a flashlight. Not because it would help, but because I had to feel like I was doing something. A local at the bait shop told me the lake had its own rules during fog season, cryptic advice to keep lights on and never respond to voices from the water. A few days later, when family visited, the fog came early again. While eating on the porch, a faint splash caught our niece's attention. I brushed it off as a fish, but late that night, footsteps re-emerged, slow, wet, unhurried, moving across the deck. I stood still, letting the sounds come and fade, never peeking out. Morning revealed no footprints, but the dock ladder was dripping wet, as if someone had been waiting. We decided it was time to sell. Now, every foggy night, I sit by the window, flashlight in hand, watching the lake dissolve into white, waiting, unable to step onto the dock again. These unsettling lakehouse tales serve as a stark reminder that solitude in nature doesn't always guarantee peace. Each cabin, nestled away from the bustle, harbors its own hidden secrets, some lurking just beyond human perception, manifesting in inexplicable events that shake our understanding of safety and normalcy. They prompt us to reconsider what might truly dwell in the shadows, urging caution when seeking refuge in isolation. If you found these chilling lakehouse tales intriguing, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts or any strange experiences you've had. Don't forget to share these stories with friends who love a good mystery. Stay curious, stay cautious, and join us for more eerie adventures ahead.